what would you feel, like people come to you and they ask these questions, they have these perceived ideas of what they want to buy in a commercial because they might have read a book or listened to one or two podcasts. Mm-hmm. And what would you say would be the most common inaccurate, I guess, beliefs for the Australian buyer from the commercial space?
Oh, good question. You mentioned medical before. People always perceive medical to be low risk. But as I mentioned before, most medical, unless it's like a suburban dentist where it's like a retail shop, is some form of office space. So you're paying an absolute premium to have an office space which doesn't have the same capital growth, and you're putting all your money into that medical staying there. So like people will say, oh, it's the lowest risk. It's actually not. If you lose that tenant, you are stuffed. You're like, your $1 million property, once you lose that tenant, will drop to 750, 800 instantly just because of the tenant, because you're paying that premium for the tenant. So that's probably the biggest myth. But normally people come to me and they just say, oh, look, I don't want to buy like a high vacancy rate one. Like they're scared of that. And that's because some of the other buyers agents, they're yield chasers. And you get this in residential as well, where they go out and they buy the really regional areas and they're like, oh, it's great, we're getting a 7.2% net return. I'd argue buying a 6% net return in a really tightly held area with low vacancy rates, you'll get better rental increases, lower periods of vacancy, and better capital growth. So your ROI will look much better. It just doesn't look as flashy from the get-go. But I'd much rather that and be able to sleep at night than have a property sit there vacant for 2 years where your return goes to zero. It's actually negative because then you have to pay for council rates and water rates and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Do you run through those numbers with people that come to you and they go, I want to get, a higher yield, not so much like a low vacancy rate, and then you sort of educate them a little bit of like, hey, here's the numbers of like if we get something in a highly held area and the growth rate is quite good, and that growth rate is going to help us to achieve a better yield for our next tenant, or increase our yield with the current tenant. Do you sort of go through a bit of an education process with them to help them sort of see like they could buy a better asset but by just understanding a little bit more? And what are some of the things that you share with them to help them?
I'm fully transparent. The good thing for me is because like a lot of my clients come through reading my book and watching the podcasts and all of my YouTube videos and stuff like that. They're somewhat educated, but it's just assessing what they're trying to achieve. Like I don't normally buy in Townsville because vacancy rates for industrial and retail are really high. However, a few months ago, we bought for a client there, we bought a whole shopping centre for 3.4 mil that had 12 tenants. And this client was about 63, 64, I think, from memory. He does not care about capital growth. He wants something low risk with as big a return as possible. So if he was a 25-year-old, I probably wouldn't have bought it for him because I would have been like, look, there's better capital growth prospects elsewhere. But a lot would have to go wrong for him to kind of lose some money on this one in terms of cash flow, because he was actually paying cash. He actually sold a Sydney property, bought it for cash. If he loses one or two of the tenants, he's still getting a really good cash flow. So his goal was cash flow. Yeah. So we mitigate the risk by buying lots of tenants. So there's that. But yeah, you're always just trying to understand what they're trying to achieve versus what their risk profile is. And you're right. Normally I'm educating people, especially the higher risk like clients, like the ones with kids and stuff like that, and a big PPOR mortgage and stuff like that. That's where you're like, look, we're not going to chase yield, because the extra yield doesn't only change your life. Like if you go buy $1 million one and you lose 1%, like it's a difference between having like a 25 grand passive income or like a 15 grand passive income. And I know 10 grand sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's changing your quality of holiday a little bit once a year. That's it. But if that property is growing more than 10 grand a year, you're going to be much better off in 5 years' time, because you're going to have leverage to pull out equity or have extra value there. Hopefully the rents grow more as well, so that makes up the difference in the next 5 years. So yeah, exactly right. You just got to educate them. But that's my whole thing, and why people come to me is because I seem like the education guy.
Basically comes into human psychology, I believe, is same in business. When I teach people to buy businesses and when we're talking property or when we want to achieve anything in our life, I think a lot of humans now more than ever are wanting to get that instant gratification and that cash grab a lot faster versus, hey, let's go for maybe capital growth, and we're gonna get a far better result in the long run. And that's what Sam and I are big, fans of, and is like, hey, play the long game, play long-term games, long-term people, and you're gonna win, versus trying to get that quick cash grab, which actually can slow down the growth of your portfolio, right?
Yeah, I did that exact thing with my portfolio. So I used to be the resi cash flow guy, and I bought in like Cairns and Foster and all these regional towns, and I got a good passive income from it, because when interest rates were low, I was like 50 grand passive income. So I was like the guru. I'm like, oh, look how well I've done. But I bought some stupid properties. Like I bought an apartment in Cairns for $30,000 that rented for $180 a week. And because banks wouldn't lend to it, I had to pay cash. So by the time I paid the 30 grand, stamp duty, legals, all that stuff, it ended up being like 35 grand. That kind of 180 grand ended up being about $100 a week positive, because like council rates and all that type of stuff as well. I shouldn't have bought that. Like that was number 3 in my portfolio. Like that was dumb. Why the hell didn't I go to a bank and leverage? I could have bought a house in Western Sydney for 300 grand on a 90% LVR, and that would now be worth 1.2 million. Whereas I sold that one like 3-4 years ago for 55 grand or whatever it was. Like that was a silly exercise. But again, my eyes lit up for that instant gratification. I'm like, $30,000 apartment, $180 a week rent. I have to buy it. I actually sold my car at the time. I had a nice like Subaru Liberty. I sold that. I looked at my car and looked at the property. I was just like, sorry, car, you're going. I'm buying this property. Again, this wrong property, wrong time. That one might have been better for like an exit strategy. If you're an older investor, you want to kind of get the cash flow later on, where you might sell some residential, reduce the LVR and buy it cash.
Yeah, I'm still looking at opportunity cost, every single purchase. And like, I'm like going back to what you said before too, around like the sleep at night factor. That's massive for me. Where I see investors or just property people going wrong is just they're going too hard, too fast, or over leveraging themselves. And then that one small mistake like can unravel really quickly. And then that stops them from investing in the future because they've been burnt that at one time. And then it's such a shame to see that, because I mean, you do need to get your money working for you, so you don't have to work for the money at the end of the day.